first of all, thanks so much, right? So this opportunity that I have now, I would like to use a little bit for my own therapeutic reason. And this is the reason, this new book. And I don't know if anybody was reading my Substack, where I published about this traumatic story, how this book was banned in Hungary. So what I would like to do in this talk is analyzing and highlighting the most important aspects of illiberal gender politics, because I know that this is a very mixed audience, and some of you actually come first encountering this problem of gender and illiberalism. And also, I would like to advocate for new ways of scholarly communication, with setting an example. So I will go into details of this new form of communication. And here I have the slide. So this is the book, right? And the title is Orbán's Women's Affairs. I'm sure that you know who Viktor Orbán is. And there is this extremely cheesy title, right? Women's Affairs. But I will talk about, why this is the title. And this is the structure of the talk, right? So why gender matters in illiberalism, then why these women's affairs matter. I will talk a little bit about the cover of the book, and then the structure of the book, and then there are two theoretical concepts I would like to discuss with you, which is, one is this family friendliness, and the concept of family friendliness, which is a key concept of the illiberals. And then there is another concept which we coined with Weronika Grzebalska, which is the illiberal polypore state. And before you start Googling what the heck is the polypore, so this is this mushroom which lives on the trunk of the tree and sucks, instrumentalizes the energy, the resources from the tree, and producing nothing else than this polypore, this thing which lives on the tree. And of course you can say, well, this is a extremely biologizing metaphor. And in the German context, that's always, the red flag. And also, if there are Trotskyists here, I don't know if there are Trotskyists here, Trotskyists would say, every state is a polypore, right? So, this is, there is nothing new here. But I will argue there is something, but this is my contribution, the theoretical contribution. And then I will talk about the challenges of doing this book. And again, I am traumatized in several things, so I will talk about this a little bit. And then I have got conclusions, which is about why gender and illiberalism matters, right? So, what is this thing here? So, the centrality of gender and illiberalism. So, in this section, I'm arguing that you cannot do the study of illiberalism without gender, right? So, I would like to draw your attention to this blog. The ECPR has a blog which is called The Loop. And we have a section there which is gender and illiberalism. And my students who are taking the course, Gendering Illiberalism, that's their course assignment, to write a blog post. And you can read some of the blog posts there, because unfortunately not all of them were publishable, but the majority was publishable, right? And you can see that there. So, understanding gender centrality to illiberal politics isn't merely an academic exercise. It is strategically crucial for anyone concerned with defending democratic values and institutions. Too often we are tempted to dismiss gender issues as culture war, distraction from real politics of economic, security, or governance. But this dismissal itself is a strategic error. Gender questions are not peripheral skirmishes in some separate cultural battle. They are fundamental to the authoritarian project themselves. The control of bodies, families, intimate life, sits at the very heart of how illiberal movements gain, consolidate power, and reimagine society. You cannot effectively counter these movements while simultaneously ceding the terrain of gender, family, and social reproduction. To do so is to surrender ground that is essential to the entire illiberal political project. There is another reason why gender matters that we ignore at our peril. It functions as an early warning system. When we witness escalating attacks on gender equality, reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus people, we should not view this as isolated incidents or mere pandering to conservative constituencies. Instead, we must recognize them as indicators, as canaries in the coal mine, right? Signaling broader authoritarian ambition. What begins with policing of gender often extends to policing of dissent and the dismantling of civil society and the concentration of power. If we want to defend democracy, we need to understand that its erosion often begins precisely here, in the intimate space where gender and power intersect. Gender is also central to the illiberal movements thrive on narratives of crisis and decline. This declinivism, right? Gender provides the perfect vehicle for this story. Changes in gender roles, LGBTQ rights, reproductive autonomy, these become symbols of civilization under threat. To understand the centrality of gender, what we need to grasp is that illiberal politics is engaged in a continuous renegotiation of the meaning of this term, of this terminus technicus, gender itself, reshaping these meanings to serve its own agenda. So when illiberals are using the term gender, you always have to take one step back and figure out what the heck they are talking about. Because gender functions in illiberal discourse as symbolic glue. We wrote this piece with two other colleagues, which is also available in German, Gender als symbolische Gitter, right? So this is something which is, again, an interesting theoretical contribution, simply saying that gender is not what it is. So this is not like the book, right? But this is used, right? I will tell you later. So symbol, a metaphor, a discursive phenomenon. It's a proxy that possesses remarkable capacity to tap into people's feelings of uncertainty about the world around them. In times of rapid social change, economic precarity, political upheavals, environmental crisis, people experience profound disorientation. Illiberal movements exploit this uncertainty, directing attention towards particular societal issues, gender, as both as an explanation and as a scapegoat for deeper anxieties. So gender is not a thing. Gender is a glue which glues together different political actors in order to mobilize them with hate to create a new normal, right? So these make gender central to the liberal offer by providing seemingly clear answers, simplistic answers, about gender roles, family structures, and social order. This movement promises stability in an unstable world. But this offer does not more than comfort the anxious. It builds broad alliances, glues together, alliances across otherwise disparate groups, like religious conservatives, economic nationalists, traditionalists, united by shared investment in restoring or enforcing particular gender order. And this is important, right? Because this is also a very heterogeneous group. right? I mentioned the religious conservatives, economic nationalists, traditionalists, and they are only glued together with the concept of gender. That there is one common enemy, right? Through this mobilization, illiberal actors aren't merely responding to social change, they are actively working to establish a new world order. So this is not only destroying, but it's also building up something new. And that's the frightening part, because they have a very clear vision about how it goes. One in which they get to define what is legitimate and acceptable both in public and private life. And gender serves as a symbolic glue. So gender became central in this illiberal project. Finally, we must recognize that the gendered illiberal political offer, it is a political offer, right? It is not merely local or national, but rather part of an international movement. What we are witnessing is a transnational knowledge transfer, illiberal movements learning from each other, sharing strategies, rhetoric, and legal framework across the borders. As attack on gender equality in one country becomes a template for another. This is a coordinated transnational project, and it requires similarly coordinated response. So if you go to the Instagram and you see a woman who is holding a sheet saying, "I am not a feminist because I love my family" in English, you can be sure that this meme actually shows up in Estonian, in Spanish, in Portugal, whatever. Because this is like the McDonald's, I'm sorry for this. So it is like happening in the different countries. They are all McBurgers, but in a different context. And what it makes it extremely effective, that at the same time the liberal rhetoric is also using nationalist and also patriotic arguments. So while they are arguing that they are patriotic and nationalist and supporting the real ordinary people, they are applying a transnational toolkit, right? And this is actually really an important point, okay? So the template of attacks on gender equality are used also in other academic fields, so scholars and groups. Understanding the illiberal project is impossible without talking about gender. So, it is crucial to understand the different meanings of gender in academia and in policy making. And that's why we did this book with a colleague of mine, who is a journalist, Jean Balage. And why did we do this book? Because the scholarship on gender and illiberalism is blossoming, increasing. If I want to use the same metaphor, mushrooming. On the other hand, the impact of this scholarship on policymakers and politicians and on the simple public or ordinary people is minimal. So when I write a peer-reviewed article, this is read by, it's a concrete example, 273 people. This is the article we wrote about the polypore state in a peer-reviewed theoretical article. But we published this in the Huffington Post, of all places. And then we had more than 800,000 views and translated to French, Estonian, German, whatever. So here we have a problem, and that's what we wanted to bridge with this book. And so that's why this talk is trying to do two things. One is to talk about gender and illiberalism, and also advocate for a new form of communication. Because, here we are in a fantastically privileged position. There is a university, there is heating, there is electricity, but this might not last long. And I would like to just, of course, when I'm mentioning this, colleagues are saying, aha, you are alarmist. But maybe in the Q&A we can talk about the major transformation of the public higher education in Europe and also in the US, for example. Okay, yes, illiberalism is a transnational movement. So why Prime Minister Orban, and why is this whole story about this cover? So Viktor Orban was a liberal and pro-European politician, and also he was a recipient of several Open Society and George Soros fellowships, and became a prime minister in 1998 at age of 35. And then, after two electoral defeats, after his fourth-year term, after the global financial crisis of 2008, he returned to power with a decisive victory in 2010, and he wasted no time establishing a new political system that he believed would guarantee his continual electoral process. He established what I already hinted, this polypore state, this new form of state, and I will talk about this later. The subsequent political developments in the Hungarian politics have confirmed Prime Minister's aspiration. He secured his victory in 2014, 18, and 22, and the elections are coming next year, if they are coming, which provided continuous opportunity to amend not only any legislative measures, but also the constitution of the country. And he set up a system, what he called System of National Cooperation, which is the second foundation he claimed of the Hungarian state. So if you look at this cover, I hope you recognize the pink, and also is simple but complicated symbols, standing for three different signs entangled into each other. It refers to the Hungarian crown, with a lopsided cross on the top. It also shows the sign of the feminine power upside down, and it might be also resemble the cross on the top of the hill, an ultimate symbol of Christianity. Because Viktor Orban has an obscure attraction to the crown of the medieval kings of Hungary, what you see there, and so he actually, during his first term, he put a copy of the crown and transported the crown on the Danube up to north to the ceremonial place. So in this, with this book, we analyze the illiberal powers, but also how this knowledge transfer is happening, right? Illiberal powers, especially from the East. So when because the Hungarian politics is crucial to understand, because that's the place where the Russian different policies are being tested in the European Union and then copied like a pattern to other places. So this kind of illiberal transfer is crucial to follow. Okay, so the book is actually following the structure of the CEDAW report. And here are the topics. The CEDAW report is the UN Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, founded upon the principle of the universal rights of women. This implies that women, or more accurately, all women, are entitled to have some same rights as men. The convention is based on the principle that women are inherently disadvantaged in the society due to structural inequalities. And what we are looking at this book is how this is undermined by the illiberal rhetoric, how the UN Convention and its language has been undermined. Governments have ratified the convention, are responsible for monitoring the structural inequalities women face in signing state party. The government of Hungary ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women in 1981. Therefore, it is obliged by the terms of the Convention to submit reports to the CEDAW Committee on the actions taken by the state to improve the status of women. For each report, the state is required to complete a comprehensive questionnaire. They monitor the labor market, education, health, violence against women, public institutions, politics, community, community life. These reports are evaluated by the assistance of international experts and compared to shadow reports from independent actors who are not affiliated with the government institutions. Following the comparison, the CEDAW committee issues recommendations to the countries that have ratified the convention. In the follow-up report, the committee evaluates the progress made by the government in implementing its recommendation. This is the process how the UN CEDAW committee works, which is a normative process, and it uses the technology of shaming, right? That you haven't complied with this, you haven't complied with that. So it's what we are looking at in this book, how the liberal government is hijacking this process and at the same time emptying the UN discourse. Our analysis reveals the gap between Hungary's formal gender equality laws and their real-world implementation. You can say there is nothing new here, right? All governments are basically doing kind of proxy implementation. But also the strategies, how the liberal actors are undermining this UN reporting system. By examining these cases through both the domestic impact, the UN CEDAW Committee guidance to Hungary, the book explores multiple challenges Hungarian women face: systematic discrimination without adequate legal recourse, political figures reinforcing gender stereotypes, gender-based violence, women-limited political participation, workplace inequality, potential discrimination in education and healthcare, and the unique challenges confronting women in rural and family settings. The Hungarian illiberal model is worth examining as it positions itself as a template for other nations. Central to our analysis is the Orbán government's signature initiative, which is self-proclaimed family-friendly agenda, which gained considerable international attention. I don't know if any of you have been visiting Hungary before, but if you are entering the airport, you are leaving the plane, or you are crossing the border by car, there is a huge billboard which is saying, "Welcome in the family-friendly country." So that's why, this book and also in this presentation, I will be spending time explaining what the heck is behind this family-friendly model. The 2023 CEDAW Committee review highlighted troubling trends, noting Hungary's reluctance to promote gender equality even at the rhetorical level. During the committee proceedings, government representatives explicitly framed gender equality solely within family context, effectively reducing women's identity to the role as wives and mothers. So that's why I have a special section about understanding this family friendliness, right? So-called family friendliness. This narrow definition strips women of their standing as independent participants in public life. The committee specifically noted how Hungarian government policies actively reinforce traditional gender stereotypes about family and societal roles. These developments signal a broader regression in women's rights, evident across multiple domains, from political participation and public engagement to legislative protection. This systematic rollback reflects fundamental shift in how women's roles and rights are conceived within the Hungarian society. This development, however, doesn't stay in Hungary. So there is the saying, what happened here will stay here, right? This is not the case. because these kind of policy templates are actually copy-pasted for other illiberal countries. And the Hungarian government systematically and financially supports these transfers, the know-hows, to different states in Europe and through the globe. For example, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung plays a really important role in transferring these kind of illiberal policies to Germany. The Hungarian government bought certain politicians and newspapers in Slovenia to influence the election. They are very much present in Serbia. And also, as far as buying influence is concerned, the Hungarian government is buying universities, as a matter of fact. They bought a university in Vienna, the Modul University. They bought a university in Serbia. They bought a university in England. They bought a university in Brussels. So this is when there is a government which has got unlimited, unchecked resources and power, then it's game changer. Let me give you an example, because maybe this is not clear. So, the Matthias Corvinus College, which is the flagship institution of this illiberal takeover, Matthias Corvinus College, their salary, their budget is twice as much as the budget of the whole Hungarian higher education, serving 180,000 students. Let me repeat. Twice as much as the budget of the whole Hungarian higher education, serving 180,000 students. How many people are working in the Matthias Corvinus College? If you are looking at the website, you see 12 young white men wearing very expensive looking suits and red ties, of course. So, this is not about who is financing the coffee break, right? But if somebody is getting invited to the Matthias Corvinus College, the fee is €6,000 tax-free. So it's very different, right? It's the money which is spent there. Okay. So it is an imperative to conduct international comparisons, follow the money, as the so-called family-friendly model initially implemented in Hungary is gradually spreading. And as a cautionary example, our book includes also the assessment of the different resistance strategies in Hungary that have been practical and some are actually failed. So, why did we write this book? So there have been many brave attempts in Hungary to counteract the government's repressive tendencies from both existing civil actors and newly formed grassroots organizations. Most of them yielded moderate or no results. The best example is CEU. I'm sure that some of you have been signing the petition supporting CEU. You have been demonstrating in front of the Hungarian consulate or the embassy. You signed letters as members of professional organizations. What is the impact? Nothing. We lost, we were defeated, we were humiliated, and we were betrayed. So that's why it's important to show what works and what doesn't work. So, and also this kind of historical example, the historical context explains the puzzling popularity of this illiberal party, which actually some analysts called as women's party due to its strong female support. And there are more female voters supporting the illiberal political offer than men. And it is also an important element of the gender analysis. Why the heck so many women are voting? Why do women back a political force restricting their autonomy and implementing policies detrimental to themselves and their children? Moving beyond mere explanation, the book examines how Hungarian women experience the concrete impact of illiberal governance in their daily lives. We point to the fact that women in general and gender equality in particular was not an issue of importance for the left liberal government preceding the Orban era either. So of course you can say, haha, this is the past dependency argument you are bringing forward, right? But if you are reading this chapter, which was mentioned in the introduction in the Routledge Handbook on Illiberalism, I'm actually arguing in this chapter how the failures of the neoliberalization actually contributed to the birth of the illiberal offer, and how the liberals are actually thriving on the mistakes made by mostly the neoliberal feminists. So this was one of the main reasons we paired with a journalist to write this book, as a joint effort to provide scientifically well-established arguments, based available data, and summarizing the literature, but unlike scientific papers, in a way that is easily comprehensible for anyone interested. So we basically wrote a book like a crime story. Who done it? But we know the answer, the liberals, right? So that's not really that exciting, right? So we were creating a text. We aimed that the result is not only easy to understand, but also rewarding and enjoyable to read. So we both started to write our chapters, and then we worked on the others. So it's basically a joint effort. And we were actually choosing one case study. So we start with a story. So every chapter starts with a story, and then we explain why this story matters and what can we learn from this story, especially as far as the resistance is concerned. So, and we don't have footnotes or endnotes, but we have got a 30-page long reference list because we thought that this kind of references will kill the reading experience. So, and also in the epilogue, we gave a forecast. What will happen in the 2026 election, which is a very risky thing, right? So, and especially because there is this new trend in literature, which is called redemocratization. This is a new field, I'm sure you are following it, which is really funny that in the case of Poland, when the illiberals lost by 1%, and then all the political scientists are totally excited about redemocratization. It is not redemocratization, right? It's totally different. Okay, so so this is basically why we did this, and let's go for the two important theoretical concepts, right? The family friendliness and this polypore state, which I think crucial in order to understand this connection between illiberalism and gender, right? So, the family friendliness as a political product. So, being too slow to gather momentum after the fall of state socialism, the conservative women's movement was reinvented and quickly institutionalized by the Fidesz came to power in 2010. So, this is not coming from nowhere. This is not like Athena jumping out from the head of Zeus, right? This has got roots. This has got a history, right? The conservative women's movement, which had been very much present in Hungary and also in the other countries as well from the mid-19th century. The governing party's support for women's political mobilization was not a product of sympathy for women's social position, but rather a cold-headed act of political calculation. The ruling party has relied heavily on the mobilizing power of conservative women ever since. It is not accident that the Fidesz is advertising itself as a party for women or party of women. However, the lack of unity inside the conservative representation of women led an essential tactical dilemma. What is this tactical dilemma? How can one mobilize as many women as possible for for a particular political aim, especially on election day, if that objective is to convince them that their only legitimate place is in the private homes and not in the public space. And this is a dilemma, right? So how to make women active and force them to go out to vote when actually want them to be at home, right? So how did the liberals solve this dilemma? Reinventing the concept of care was the perfect answer to this political dilemma. For centuries, teaching, rearing, and caring have been traditionally women's roles. It is not a coincidence that before the Second World War, and also during the state socialism, and also finally in the Orban era, these tasks have always been key to constructing a sharp divide between the public life, men's world, and the private life, which is women's divide. This is how, and you can say, aha, past dependency, right? But here, unfortunately, there is a continuity, right? This is how the slogan of being family-friendly became the best-selling political product to accomplish the seemingly impossible task of uniting the different branches of conservative women's movement. For several reasons, the redefinition, modernization, and the intellectual unification of Hungary's fragmented Christian conservative women's politics was a political necessity. First, the emancipatory politics of communism, such as the right to abortion of women's participation in the labor market, cannot be undone. Again, you can say, past dependency? Yes, because you cannot start from a blank page, right? So women in Hungary had the right to abortion from 1945 onwards because of the massive rapes committed by the Red Army soldiers when liberating Hungary. Then they introduced the free and accessible abortion from 45 onwards, right? 1945. So this became really a part of the kind of habitus, right? And also that every woman is expected to work during communism, right? And that's difficult to undo. So therefore, they needed an answer. The second, as a member of the European Union, the Hungarian government is obliged, even if merely rhetorically, to improve gender equality. So you cannot have a government which is saying all women should stay at home, right? You cannot do this, right? Third, a dual-earner family model of the statist feminist period of the communism is impossible to replace with a male breadwinning model, independently that's what, these dread wives are basically advertising. Because the average wage in Hungary is among the lowest in the European Union. Apart from isolated cases, single-earner family means poverty. Facing financial reality comes at a steep price for both men and women. With its reinvention of conservative women's policy, the liberals has succeeded in putting a demographic and economically insignificant country on the front pages of the newspapers. Hungary regularly hosts international conferences to solve the demographic crisis. The World Congress of Families, I don't know if you know this organization. If you haven't, please go for their webpage and check out what they are doing. This is founded by oligarchs around Putin and also revivalist fundamentalists in the US. And this is an umbrella organization for all those illiberal so-called gongos. They are not NGOs, but government-sponsored organizations. The think tanks of the government are invented, trained, and promoted female politicians who were supposed to validate and popularize the government's family-friendly model. So if you go to the Matthias Corvinus webpage, which I already mentioned, this is the thing when 12 young white men are smiling on the webpage. They have a women's leadership training. So again, this is the paradox. How to mobilize women while to make them passive. The result of this costly social experiment remained dubious. Hungary has got the most expensive social policy. Hungary spends the most on social welfare provisions in the European Union without any serious impact. The number of births is lower than ever, and the social inequalities are increasing. But I will talk about this later. It's difficult to say because there is no statistical data. Okay, while the European Union requirement for gender equality are at most only achieved formally, meaning on paper, the Prime Minister has managed to appoint 3 female ministers, 3, in a decade and a half, 2 of whom felt fallen from power due to the hypocritical modus operandi of the government. On the other hand, the family-friendly rhetoric has proven to be the most powerful propaganda tool at home and also internationally. The former president of Hungary, first female president, she is now touring around the globe with supporting and disseminating the so-called successful Hungarian family-friendly policy. We could openly object, even with the silent hope for success, to the idea that supporting families is one of the most important tasks of a government. So, however, this easy rhetorical success of the family friendliness led to a trap. The political problems arises as the regime has had a critical political promise linked to its women's policy and has delivered virtually nothing. While birth rates started to rise temporarily in early 2010, after a few years the trend reversed and only became worse than ever. Meanwhile, the number of women childbearing age steadily falls, with the total number of newborns in Hungary falling to an unprecedented low by the first half of 2025. This, together with the outgoing migrants and the working conditions and the low life expectancy in the European standards due to the non-functioning health system, has resulted Hungary's population shrinking the fastest in the European Union. So, it also shows that illiberal governance, no matter that, there is this facade that it is extremely successful, in reality, it is not, right? The ineffectiveness of this family policy is particularly embarrassing for the government, given the many other state responsibilities have been sidelined and underfunded precisely because of financing one of the most expensive family policies in the world. Even since the 2022 parliamentary elections, Fidesz has been experiencing one political crisis after the other, which makes possible for the opposition to point to the wasted opportunities and finances of the past year, which led to grave policy failures of virtually every state-run welfare system, from healthcare, public education, child protection, or public transportation. There is the train system between Budapest and Vienna, which is like a 2-hour train. This has been constantly collapsing because in the past 15 years they haven't changed anything. Okay, so what makes it successful? Because you see the paradox, right? That the illiberal state is non-functioning, produces nothing. On the other hand, you have got all these success stories, right, of re-elected. So when they started to build this, and now we are getting to the second theoretical point, what it's to understand what is new here, and that is the illiberal polypore state. So political analysts have been and still are debating what is the best way to describe the operation of these illiberal regimes, not only in Hungary, but in Brazil, Serbia, whatever. The most frequent terms described in Hungary and in other places is the illiberal state democratic autocracy, and mafia state. The mafia state is used mostly. One of the first theorists of modern liberal democracy, the French political scientist, historian, and aristocrat Tocqueville, who wrote 200 years ago about how the idea of equality as a kind of wild outgrowth could eventually lead to the suppression of freedom itself. According to the French historians, in declining democracies, there may be a parliamentary election, formal constitutional institutions, but the institutional guarantee of the liberty is missing. There are no checks and balances, and the state institutions that have been emptied and forced into an executive role can no longer limit the power and the control of actions of the hegemonic government. The rule of law doesn't apply, and the hegemon leader of the state dominates every aspect of the public life. So Tocqueville himself did not use this term illiberal democracy. Still, scientists attribute the first analysis of such state to him. Nothing new is under the sun, right? When describing the illiberal states, political analysts often use the term illiberal. And this illiberal is a kind of fuzzy term, right? And it was used first for describing the Latin American countries in the 1970s by Fred Zakaria. If you are watching the CNN, you cannot avoid seeing him. And then this concept of illiberalism is taken over by the political scientists. And we invented this term, this polypore state, illiberal polypore state. So what the heck is this polypore state? I already spoke about, the tree and the mushroom. And the reason we invented this term, because it is a metaphor or a picture which you can see, right? You see the tree. When I'm talking about this, I'm sure that everybody is visualizing the tree and the polypore. And it actually helps you to think about strategies, how to fight against this, right? Because it's very easy. So the concept of polypore state highlights the system's unique characteristic and tries to capture the specificity of modus operandi. So we were arguing in this article, which had 273 readers as an academic article, but 800,000 readers on the Huffington Post, that the modus operandi is the specificity of the illiberal state. And we were arguing in this article that this modus operandi is deeply gendered. So if you can recall the beginning of this talk, when I was giving a list why you cannot do an analysis of illiberalism without gender, this is the moment to connect. The beginning of the talk and now. So, polypore, this which lives on the trunk of the tree, and it sustains itself from the trunk of the tree and only leaves the tree alive for its remaining resources. There is this debate. Will Hungary leave the European Union? Will there be a Huxit? Will there be a Sloksit, right? The Slovakians. No, there won't. Because they need those resources which are coming from those institutions. The polypore state functions similarly, meaning its aim falls far from the desire to make all its citizens prosper and feel secure. The polypore is only interested in the polypore, keeps the tree alive, but only interested in keeping the polypore alive. And they don't have a single original ideas. What they have is this process of sucking from the tree the ideas, values. And of course you can say, what the heck, I need to listen to this. Because the illiberalism is, in every country there are certain illiberal aspects, right? So illiberalism is not like this dark cloud which falls on certain countries. There are roots of this illiberalism. So if you read this chapter which was mentioned at the beginning, the Handbook of Illiberalism, Gender and Illiberalism, I'm strongly arguing in this chapter about the historical roots of illiberalism, which are connected to the European modernity and the European Enlightenment, the European history, which is connected to persecution, genocide, colonialism, imperialism, forced migration, basically othering, right? The process of othering. And this kind of othering, right? This is us and them. We, who are the better ones, and them, who are not important. And this tradition is coming back with the illiberalism. They are not interested in all citizens. They are interested in citizens to make sure that they vote for them, but they are only interested in keeping these citizens alive till the moment they are actually voting for them and getting them resources. So, what are the ways how this polypore operates? So it is rooted in an ideology, but it's a distinctive model of governance. And it has got three functions. The first is parallel institutions. The key mechanism of the polypore state is a creation of parallel institutions, particularly in the civil sectors. Government-organized NGOs, the so-called Gongos, I already mentioned the Congress of Families, World Congress of Families, mimic independent organizations and are funded by the state and serve its ideological goals. They look like NGOs. They are registered as NGOs. Their programs are like NGOs, like protecting women against domestic violence or supporting migrants or whatever, but they are not NGOs because they are loyal transmitters of the ideology of the illiberal state. In gender politics, these Gongos address issues like work-life balance, support for mothers, but only within frameworks that reinforce state narratives. Their existence allows the government to report a vibrant civil society to international bodies, while in reality they drain resources. Think about the polypore legitimacy grassroots groups advocating for genuine human rights. So if you read this particular CEDAW report, which I mentioned, I mean, the government shamelessly reports a blossoming feminist scene in Hungary. But of course, it's not there, right? These are polypore institutions. The second modus operandi of the polypore state is familialism, or selective welfare provisions. The state approaches to gender equality is reframed as familial policies. So this is not family policy, it's familial policies, supporting only a narrow demographic married, heterosexual middle-class families. Welfare programs such as public works schemes or childcare benefits are selectively distributed to reinforce loyalty and control. Even seemingly progressive measures like shared parental leave often mask economic strategies that disadvantage women, such as fathers claiming benefits while mothers remain unpaid caregivers. Despite this, many women continue to support policies that undermine their long-term economic security, a paradox we are explaining in this volume. The third one is securitization, the politics of fear. Security has become the central rhetorical tool of the polypore state. Every policy is framed as a defense against different threats: migrants, gender studies, George Soros, Brussels, European Union, Ukrainians recently, allowing the government to present itself as vigilant while concealing corruption and total incompetence. The strategy delegitimizes human rights organizations, especially those advocating for women, portraying them as threats to traditional values. The result is a public discourse dominated by fear, where the slogan is no gender. So there was a period when all the billboards were covered with this poster, no gender. So, What were the challenges for writing this book? The lack of data. It is hard to believe in Hungary it's challenging to obtain statistical data. The Hungarian Central Statistical Office, a government-sponsored agency, collects and publishes less and less gender disaggregated data. Furthermore, the existing data are regularly accompanied by misleading official explanations altered upon political pressure. State employees are not giving information or interviews to independent researchers or government critical journalists, so that it is really difficult to know what is happening. Second, the media products, either directly or indirectly through state advertising, living off the government financial support, only publish stories that show the government in a positive light. They tend to underline the perceived benefits, desirability, everything is fantastic, everything is a success story, right? And those who are questioning that, they face frequent harassment, financial instability, and personal threats. And that is resulted in a divided and hostile society. On the other hand, it really created difficulty for an unbiased analysis. The only reliable source is actually the CEDAW committee. So that's report. So that's why I spent so much time to describing this, because that's the only reliable source. And for illiberal regimes, which is not only the Hungarian one, I strongly recommend you to do the same analysis. And besides that, we also used hundreds of articles, reports, and different interviews. So, censorship, and here comes my, ventilating the story. So, in an illiberal country, you don't only have to have resources to write a book, and we worked on this book for 1.5 years secretly. I got the Willy Brandt professorship in Sweden to do this, but you also have to publish it, right? And we had this book, and it's a kind of sturdy book, but in Hungary we were unable to publish it. And I spare you the increasingly awkward emails and personal conversations through which collegial relationships of several decades turned into nothing when colleagues in publishing business were coming up with the most impossible excuses with the downcast eyes. Completely understandable. Fear eats soul. So, then 3 Slovak-Hungarian women who established a feminist publishing house actually put their own money in publishing this book, again, getting to the reader. And when we launched this book in Budapest, in the Democracy Institute, all the non-government media covered this volume, launching the event, and that night, the book disappeared from all websites in Hungary. Especially the bookshop chain, which was expected to sell it, its name is Lira, took off all the books. So I, very active on social media, so I commented on my social media platforms that this is censorship and it is worse than during communism. Then this book provider put the book back, saying that they distributed, but it sold out, unfortunately. Interestingly, some bookstore chains ordered few dozen copies, even though there was a big interest. Again, I posted on my Facebook. The Solomonic decision was made that they don't order. So in the website, they say that they don't accept orders. Go to the bookshops, but the book was not available in the bookshops. But now, because of this public outcry, it is available on the online shops, and then you can also order it from Slovakia, because this is in Slovakia. So, why do they care about this book, right? Because this is really an important intervention to have this book, taken off from the different websites. Because the liberal state has no original ideas of its own. And I mean, this is how the polypore works. Everything it proclaims and everything it does is a copy-paste from previous systems and emptying and exploiting them, right? So, but it's still available and it's coming out in English, and I hope it will come out in German. So, what is the conclusion? Where does it leave us? Where does it leave us? If gender is indeed central to illiberal politics, it functions both as an entry point and a foundation for the authoritarian project. Then our response should be equally strategic and equally serious. First, we must take gender seriously as a site of political struggle. I talked about this at the beginning. Second, we need compelling counter-arguments about freedom, family, and belonging. Narratives that don't see these powerful concepts through illiberalism. The illiberalism has claimed ownership over ideas of protection, stability, community. But these do not inherently belong to any political tradition. We need to articulate our own vision, what family can be, what freedom means, what belonging looks like, visions that inclusive rather than exclusionary. Third, we must build coalitions that connect feminist, LGBTQI+, and democratic movements because these struggles are fundamentally intertwined. Too often, we organize in silos, treating gender equality, LGBTQI+ rights, and democratic governance as separate causes, with separate constituencies. But illiberal movements understand what we sometimes forget. These battles are interconnected. The same forces threatening one threatens all. Our coalitions must reflect this reality. We need a progressive glue. The liberals are using gender as a symbolic glue to exclude and to create hate, but a progressive glue is needed. Fourth, to move away from the ivory tower, writing in understandable language. And you have seen this talk was, I hope it was really accessible, because I think it's important to understand what this is about. Fifth, accept that the international organizations who expected to safeguard gender equality, they fail. CEU is a good example how international organizations fail. And also the FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency in Vienna, which is advertising on its webpage the Hungarian family law, which defines the marriage as a marriage between men and women as a best practice. Or the EIGE, which is in Vilnius, the European Institute for Gender Equality, which blacklists critical gender academics and policymakers following the response coming from illiberal governments. Or the Council of Europe, which is shelving the reports they have commissioned on gender equality. 6. We must internalize a fundamental truth. Defending gender equality isn't separate from defending democracy. They are the same fights. You cannot have genuinely democratic society while maintaining hierarchies of gender and sexuality. One cannot maintain gender equality under authoritarian rule. These commitments stand together or fall. Gender is central to illiberal politics because all visions of how society should be ordered begin with the vision of how gender should be ordered. Who gets to decide? Who gets to belong? Who gets to strive? If we want to defend plurality of democracy, we must defend it on this terrain. Not as an afterthought, not as a concession to constituencies, but as a core commitment. Because it's here is the politics of gender that the future of democracy itself is being decided. Thank you.